No role plays, no conference calls, no BS. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader. This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, we're going to be going over a second part in this series, talking about cognitive distortions in the workplace. On the last episode from last Monday, if you've not listened to it yet, go back and listen to it. Kind of kicks off the series nicely. We talked about filtering, polarization, and overgeneralization. On this episode, we're going to go over 3 more. We're going to talk about people who discount the positive. We're going to talk about people who jump to conclusions, and we're going to talk about people who have a habit of catastrophizing the situation, thinking that it's going to be significantly worse than what it is. So I think these are important because when we get in our own heads and we get in our own way from making the correct decisions, oftentimes it's because of these things. And a lot of these things have to do with how we judge other people that we work alongside or how we judge ourselves. And a lot of it can be can lead us to make the wrong decisions based on negative things that we house within ourselves as it relates to people we work with, or quite honestly, as it relates to ourselves. It's impossible, I think, to never do any of these. But what our goal here with this series is to make sure that you have the tools necessary to be able to potentially recognize when you might be doing one of these things and then kind of counteract it. Kind of think harder about what you're about to say or about to do and whether or not it's the right way forward. Is it based on one of these fallacies we create in our own heads, or is it rooted in actual reality? So again, the first one we're talking about today is discounting the positive. And I like this one because we all know those people who, you give an example, you compliment somebody. Oh, your hair looks really nice today. Oh, I didn't do anything. Like I didn't do anything in my hair today. I did nothing. I'm not, I didn't try your hair. It's dismissive instead of just accepting the compliment. And oftentimes it's because the person doesn't believe they're deserving of the compliment. They discount the positive. They think either you're placating them or lying to them or, trying to get something from them by giving them that compliment, or they just genuinely think that they are not deserving of that compliment, even if you're seriously giving it. And so if you do this and get that response from people, or if somebody, gives you a compliment and you respond in that way, this is something you should think about, because I'll tell you, it doesn't feel good to give somebody a compliment and have them dismiss it as if it didn't really mean anything, or like your compliment didn't land well because the person wasn't deserving of it. If I gave you a compliment, I think you deserve it.
Well, thank you. First and foremost,
I didn't compliment
you. Sorry, I thought you did. Yes. I just assume the compliment. That's what
right.
I do, right?
Assuming the compliment is not one of these cognitive distortions, Lorenzo.
It's not at all.
No.
It's my own. It's my own ego in my
Yes.
ecosystem. You said this earlier, but I think I want to underline it. That like just awareness of these things as kind of like the first step of really thinking about how does this show up for you as a leader, and how might it show up to your team? And again, to your point, like this is not about necessarily eliminating these things. I'm definitely not a psychiatrist or psychologist. I don't know how to do any of that, but I think that they're important to be aware of to make sure that we're not building a culture or we're not having a negative impact on the team. So when you're talking about discounting the positive, I was like, man, I know people who like have Groupons for the pod. Their discount goes so deep and so often that it's like it's a subscription service.
Yes.
And you're right though. Sometimes it's like it feels like they don't know how to take compliments well.
Right.
But it's so much deeper than that. For some people it is maybe like the recognition part's a little bit like I don't do that well.
Yeah,
but it's so
like if it's in
deep.
public or something around other
Right,
people.
exactly. Like,
sure.
I understand that, right? Like the spotlight, right? They don't want to be in the spotlight. But if it's just you and me, and I'm talking about some nice work that you did, or I'm going over a review, or I'm talking about something like, and it's just like, and it makes you uncomfortable. That I think is a little bit of a sign of like, look, I want you to understand the value that you bring. I want you to hear these words because you've done really nice work here. Like, I think sometimes that could be a point where we can step in to really consider like the confidence or what might be there. Again, sometimes it's something that some people have to work it out personally, but sometimes there are some things in the workplace that can cause this to be a thing, whether it's happening now or it happened in the past and they're holding on to it. So it's just moments to kind of pause for a second and think about, is there something here that we can talk about to make sure that somebody that you're working with, they truly understand you're being authentic with the recognition that you give them, and you're not going to let it kind of like brush it off and move on.
Right. Yeah, that's spot on. This happened to me once. I applied for a job. It was a long time ago now. I applied for a job that I was pretty sure I wasn't qualified for. And I went through 2 different interviews that seemed to go really well. Like I left the interview thinking, oh, wow, they were good questions. I answered the questions. I feel like I did well on the questions. And then, you get in your own head and you start thinking, maybe I didn't do as well on those questions and they won't call me back. But lo and behold, they called me back. They wanted another interview. And I'm like, wow, I guess I really did do a good job in the interview and I want to move on to the next one. And then I started to think to myself, wait a minute. If I'm not qualified for this job and I did well in this interview, what does that say about the company? Are they a poor judge of talent because they want me to come back for a second interview? So I literally got in this spiral in my own head thinking that there's no way that someone with my background or history is qualified for this job. Maybe one level below this job, yes, but not the level that I was applying for. And if I did well in that interview, then what is that? Maybe they're not good judges of talent if they want me to come back. And so this is where it kind of rears its head for me is kind of getting in my own head and thinking that if something did go well, that there's something I'm missing. There's an element or an aspect or an angle that I am not considering. And if I did consider that element or angle or other information, I would realize that it did not go as well as I thought it did. And so that's where it kind of hits hard for me. The next one I want to talk about is jumping to conclusions. And jumping to conclusions is that phrase is so ubiquitous that it is used even outside of these kind of cognitive distortions that we have. But when it specifically relates to in the organization or as a leader, jumping to conclusions is the thing that happens when, and I'll relate back to my personal life too. Your boss walks into the office and you say hi, and they didn't hear you legitimately, but they walk past you without saying anything because they didn't hear you, and you think they ignored you, and the very first thing you think is, oh my God, I'm fired. they just can't look me in the eye yet. Something must have happened. Let me go try to log into my systems because I'm probably logged out already. They just haven't told me yet, or that one, you go to log in and you type in the wrong password, and it doesn't let you in. And the first thing you think is, oh my gosh, am I fired? I can't log into anything. And then you type in the right one and you get in fine. But jumping to conclusions is just this, your brain goes to this place of thinking that something is negatively going to happen when there's nothing real that is rooted in.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great call. And I think we all do it. I think we all do. We all jump to conclusions. But I think in the leadership space and the cognitive dysfunction is when we tend to jump to conclusion in the negative way. Like we assume the intent was negative. We're like, well, they should know better. So if they didn't do it that way, they must have done that on purpose.
Like they were cutting corners, not that they didn't know.
Right, exactly. Like that happens, and that can be really, really tough. And again, something that is, are you giving people the benefit of the doubt? Is your reaction to say, oh, of course they did that? Like, of course, like they're just like, of course they did that. Or you're saying like, well, I wonder why they did that. Yep. I would believe they didn't do it on purpose, so let me go with an element of curiosity to go discover this. And look, if I'm proven wrong and they did do it on purpose, well, at least now I know.
Now you know.
Right? But more than likely, it probably wasn't that way. And so I think it's something, again, that we all do it, but trying to make sure that we check it. If it's consistently or constantly in the negative conclusion, then that's something that I think we probably have to continue to work through.
Right. That's spot on. This happens a lot in the retail space. If somebody calls out from work and they say they can't come in for their shift and they say they're sick in bed, if it's the very first time in 3 years that's ever happened, I don't know anybody who'd ever question whether or not that was true. If it happens to be every single Saturday for the last 6 months, I don't imagine anybody wouldn't question whether or not that was true. And so again, we can't help the way we think, But as leaders, we need to control how we respond and what our actions are. And so this is important that if you are jumping to a conclusion about how something is, again, your mind can do what it wants to do, but you need to play in the space of what is objective when it comes to holding people accountable. And so it's not based on whether or not you believe them. It's based on what is the policy. What is the policy? Follow the policy and make sure it's followed for everybody equally. And then you can't go wrong regardless of what your mind might be, doing to you in the moment. The thing that I want to kind of tie into this, though, and this is important, is that, back to my example of feeling like I was fired because the boss didn't look at me when they came in and they just legitimately didn't hear me, is that why would I think that? Meaning, did I think that because there's a reason that it is either deep subconscious or in the back of my mind that where I might have they might have a reason to fire me, or is it truly just just a level of anxiety that I carry around with me all the time? And either it can be either. But if it is something that is rooted in something that you know of, that you can identify, then it's time to address whatever that thing is. And so, like, if my wife comes home and it seems like she's giving me the cold shoulder a little bit, and I start thinking, is she mad at me? Did I do something wrong? If that's my first response, then I need to start thinking about, okay, what did I do? What did I do wrong?
Yeah, guilty conscience.
Guilty conscience, exactly. If my first response is, what did the kids do? Right? Did they were they a rough bunch today? If that's my first thought, then I don't feel any personal pressure to figure out what I did wrong, and that can just jump in and help. And so if you are concerned about whether or not you've actually are the cause of this, so you're jumping to conclusions, but it's rooted in something where if you really wanted to look at yourself in the mirror, maybe there is something there that could be a kind of a signal to you that it's something that needs to be addressed. If there's nothing and it's just that you can dismiss it as just kind of a general anxiety, then it is what it is. Your mind probably will never stop doing that as long as you can kind of snap out of it pretty quickly and get to a point where you realize, no, they probably just didn't hear me. Go up to them and say hi again and make sure of it. Don't ignore them the entire day, hoping they don't have time to fire you. Believe me, if you were fired, they'd find a way to fire you. They'd pull you in. So definitely address it more quickly rather than less quickly, because at the very least you can use it to kind of get out of that trap and move on with your day and not kind of be like dragging it along with you the entire day. The last one I want to talk about, which is something that could be an entire episode all on its own, is this subject of catastrophizing things. It's thinking that it's kind of creating a worst case scenario about what the outcomes are going to be, and it's such a negative outcome that if you were to stop to think about it, you would realize it's not even plausible to begin with, or pretty close to implausible. And I like this one because it's a real easy one to get out of if you can recognize that it's happening in the moment, and if you can ask yourself some questions that help you get out of it.
Yeah, this is definitely the what if one, right? Like,
right.
What if this happens, and what if this happens, and what if this happens? And you're like, man, that sounds like a great movie that I would go see. But that's definitely not going to happen here.
Right.
But it's so, you're so right though. It's kind of like it's one of those things in leaders, and let's be real and transparent for a second. When you are a leader of people, and when you have the authority to hold people accountable, and in some instances terminate people's employments, if you put somebody if I walk up and say, "Hey, Chris, I need to talk to you today," and you're like about what? Like 30 minutes. Like, I'll find time for us to talk, and then I walk away. Right, I might be
that's
intentionally
a jerk move right there. If you're a leader,
you're right. That's right. Like, I'm sharing this because sometimes there is an urgency, a severity. There's sometimes people have done things that need to be addressed with a certain element of like, this can't happen again. Like, whatever it was that you did, I need you to understand how serious this is, right? So again, I'm not saying that this is a good thing. It's not a good thing to do. I'm just using this as the example of that leaders know that they have this authority and power. Leaders know that if you don't explain the why, or if you're not saying, hey Chris, I want to talk a little bit later on today just about some of your recent attendance, right? So just we can talk about it, we can better understand.
Yep.
At least you know what we're going to talk about. You know what the context is. You know if you've had bad attendance, right? But at least you're like, okay, like look, I know what's going on. That's a real clear example of like how you could create this in a team or in a culture, and you want to avoid that. But also like what you said earlier, it's like sometimes it's easy to get out of it when you recognize it, because I think sometimes we also do those types of things of like, oh my God, like, okay, like, so if that happens and this is going to happen and this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And it's like, okay, wait a minute. That would take a lot of things to have to happen. Let me slow down for a second and let me go maybe talk to a mentor, take a minute, count to 10, whatever works for me to kind of bring it down, and then reconsider what's going on with a little bit more of a less negative creative mind.
Yeah, if you find yourself getting into like a downward spiral that begins with a misinterpreted look from a coworker and ends with you figuring out how quickly you can flee the country, you've really gotten in your own head on this, and you kind of need to dial it back a bit. But it's natural to assume that, especially when something starts out negative. And so I'll give a perfect example. Let's say that you get in a car accident and you had to call a spouse or a parent or someone to tell them that you got in a car accident. It's probably a good idea to start the conversation with everybody's okay, not we were in a major car accident, right? You start with everybody's okay, and just so you know, we were in a car accident. You don't let the person that you love get into their own heads when it comes to things like that. That's just kind of common sense, common knowledge. So at the very least, you should be doing that for your people too. Yeah, I would take it a step further than what you even said, and I would say, hey, we need to connect a little bit about your attendance a little bit later, just so you know, it's not a huge deal. It's just a talk. Right? Like if it's true.
Unless it is a huge deal.
If it is a huge deal, you can't say, you don't lie. You can't lie.
No.
But don't allow that person to think it's going to be worse than what it is, because that's doing them a disservice. And believe me, they will not be productive or good at their job the entire day until that conversation happens. And so the sooner the better that you have that conversation, but know that's all they're thinking about until then. And so if you're a leader, it's your responsibility to make sure that they have to consider the catastrophes for as short a period of time as possible.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 minute hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
All right, for this episode's 1 minute hack, here's what I want you to do. This is relating to the element that we talked about today called discounting the positive. It's a cognitive distortion that lets you kind of get in your own head and not accept a compliment from somebody or believe you did a good job. It's the only one we spoke about today that has to do with self-perception more so than perception of other people. And the way to get around this, the way to kind of catch yourself when it's happening, is to daily keep a journal of something that you did that was positive every single day, or as often as you can. Whatever interval you set for yourself, just stick to it. If it's once a day or twice a week or whatever it is, write it down. Something that you did well, an achievement you received, or that you got, or that you did well. And then the second thing you do is when someone sends you an email or a note or a message or something that is positive, save it. Keep it filtered to a different folder, or make a copy of it, or save it somewhere so you can kind of have this record of the things that you do well. These aren't to prove to anybody else that you've done something. This is to be able to remind yourself that when you start getting in your own head and thinking only the negatives about yourself, that there's a lot of positives there too, and the positives almost definitely outweigh the negatives, and at least outnumber the negatives for sure. So it's a good way to be able to look back at these things and remind yourself in the moment to help you get out of the space. But again, you should also address it with the person and follow up and make sure that there's nothing there, as opposed to carrying it around with you. This is just a way to kind of help you get through it in the moment.
Yeah, I think it's a great 1 minute hack. And I also think that this is a space where other people in your life, other mentors, other coworkers, people that you've got great relationships with, can really be leveraged as well. So outside of like the saving of communications or recognition, I know sometimes if I get in that space where I'm just like, this is crazy and like, I can't believe I'm dealing with this, I'll call somebody else who I work with that would understand the context, and then, basically, complain to them for 5 minutes and let them laugh about it, and we can talk about it. Like, it's just a good And it's a good point of release. It's a good remembrance. It's a good like can you believe this is what's going on, or this is like, can you believe that this is what I thought, or this like, I think it's just a helpful way to have people in your life along with those types of emails or messages or whatever, but actually have people that can help you to bring you back to center, to bring you back with positivity, to say, hey, dude, I understand, I get it. Like it is crazy, but also like, don't forget why we do it. Don't forget, what we've done. Don't forget the work that you do with this. I think that's also super important.
Right. If you've ever been told, and I can speak from personal experience, if you've ever been told that you're overthinking something, someone ever says to you, you're putting too much thought into this, so you're overthinking this. Chances are it's not because you overthought the positive. Chances are it's not because you were assuming positive intent and trying to move through it. It's you got in your own head, and we're trying to figure out ways to mitigate potential fallout. And then someone will respond to you saying you're putting too much thought into this, meaning this is the exact same thing. This is the nice way of saying you are assuming you're filtering out the positive and only looking at negative, that you are jumping to conclusions. So those are kind of keywords to look for here. If you find yourself being told by people who are close to you, you're overthinking this too much, they're nicely saying that you're doing one of these things. So kind of look for that too.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.